to start off, we were just discussing there that you said you are not a teacher, but definitely a lot of experience kind of working in that education realm. You said you have a social work background, which I think you are more at the heart of the problems of education in that realm than a lot of teachers would be. You probably see a lot of things that we would be protected from kind of on a daily basis. I think your book, Loving Students on Purpose, I think in going through it myself, some things kind of need to be reminded more than they need to be taught. And that's kind of what comes to mind when I'm kind of going through that book about just the way we should, I guess, set ourselves up to be successful in front of and for the students. But I guess first off, before I talk too much to get us going here, tell us about kind of maybe not just like inspiration for kind of going into that book, but I guess why did you kind of feel the calling to pursue talking about being better with students as kind of a primary goal of yours?
Yeah, well, I've worked in schools for over the last 2 decades in many capacities, from teacher aiding all the way through to being responsible for student care and well-being across an entire school. And what I learnt during that particular time was that these concepts, like you said, they're actually not revelationary, they're not new, but we forget them in the busyness. And I started to notice, because we had a team who were living and breathing, loving our students on purpose, behavior education every single day. We started to draw a lot of attraction from schools all over. We had a school from Canada come visit our school. And so what we decided to do was start to write it down. What were we doing? Because what I was finding, as schools were visiting us constantly, we were spending a lot of time hosting, that I wasn't actually telling them anything new. I was simply encouraging them to keep doing what they're doing. And I don't ever come across a school that's not going out of their way to educate students, equip students, love students, raise them up,
Mhm.
protect them. Those are all, core characteristics of schools and educators. But sometimes in the busyness, we just need that reminder that this is why we do what we do. This is what drew us into educating. And you mentioned I'm not a teacher. I am social work and neuroscience background. And so, yes, being at the heart of all the things that go wrong in the school. Sometimes my schools say it's not social work, it's the secret weapon. It's,
Yeah.
somebody who's behind the scenes and they've got all the case files and they know the details of what's going on with complex students' lives, family lives, and staff. And just being a voice of human behavior, understanding human behavior to the leadership team so they can make informed decisions rather than just going off on instinct or.
Mr. Clark After Dark is brought to you by Luxy. That's Luxy. Luxy is the standard for modern dating, as it gives you a greater understanding of any potential match's intentions and background before you make your move. Swiping endlessly in other dating apps can be exhausting and often leave you with only the leftovers in your dating pool. Luxy is an exclusive platform with just a 10 to 15% acceptance rate, as well as a profile and income verification feature, so you can be confident you're only connecting with those who meet your high standards. The community guidelines emphasize safety, trust, and equality by strictly prohibiting scams, explicit content, and harassment. 2025 is your year to stop settling. With Luxy, there is no luck involved, just real connections with people who truly match what it is you are looking for. Download the Luxy app today to see if you qualify for a better chance at finding the right person for you. And now, back to the show.
Or sometimes using their own filter of how they want to rescue or help, that's actually not always helpful. Just gives it that little extra, I guess, space. But for me, it really was, how can I impart some of the skills I have as social work and neuroscience into just anyone in the school system? I don't care if they're in the tuck shop or if they're in the groundskeeping or admin.
Yeah.
When a kid walks into a school, they see an adult and they think, oh, what am I going to learn from you today? And so they look at them and they watch them and they learn from them. And it really doesn't matter who you are in a school system, the kids are learning from you. And so I gave up a long time ago trying to convince people I was not a teacher. Even some of my family thinks I'm still a teacher because I work in schools. I've only largely, schools is all the only place I've worked. But yeah, it's been really focused on how do I encourage the people around me to do what they're already doing so well. That's been my core message.
Yeah. And I think too, because for me, like everyone has the institutional biography, like they go through school throughout their lives, they have an idea of what they think. They think teachers are just I don't know what they think they're doing. Maybe they stay at school all day, yet no one does anything. I don't know where that narrative kind of got intertwined and culturally lately. For myself, in the last few years, just this year since I moved, I'm now in like a resource position. So now every Wednesday morning, first thing, we have the meeting with the principal and the vice principal and the
Mhm,
resource teachers, and the social worker comes in and
mhm,
potentially someone from district. And it's easy for me still going into a classroom after that, maybe even seeing the same kid that we've just discussed that morning about like things that are going on, and still potentially be put off by what they said or potentially be offended by something they say. But one thing that always kind of comes to mind for me throughout these past 6 months, and I'm going to steal a quote from someone. I find them commonly plagiarizing quotes on this podcast. I just forget I just forget the names, but it's all behavior makes sense with enough information. And I feel like that has been the, like, because I'll notice, oh, like a student that I have a good relationship with, like they haven't really, I guess, like them and I haven't necessarily had the same level of connection, or there's been a bit more pause in their interaction as of late. Then we'll go to our resource meeting and they're like, oh yeah, X, Y, and Z happened last week. And you're like, oh, okay. Like it really takes constant reminder in the busyness to understand that it's not about you. It
mhm.
almost never is. But I guess like what has been your experience? I guess maybe just working with resource teams, especially for like what the teachers are actually doing behind the scenes to help with those.
Well, I mean, first of all, teachers are one of the hardest working professions in the world. They deserve their holidays, they deserve their pay. Yeah, I get blown away by the misconception about, teachers, having these cruisy jobs and getting all these holidays. It frustrates me because teachers are literally the one profession in the world that is going to teach every single other profession that we have out there. Because they're their core foundation teachers. They're going to teach our future doctors,
Wow.
our dentists,
Yeah.
marine biologists, our drug dealers, our street thugs, everyone who comes through into a profession of some kind
Yeah. They
had a
learned
teacher.
something from you.
Yeah, even if they did homeschooling or distance education, they've still got teachers in their world and their life creating curriculum. So, it's a huge misconception to think that, teachers are not doing much. They're working incredibly hard. But to speak into, your teams, a phrase that I often remind myself, and it's one that I steal from Danny Silk, my co-author, and that is this idea of, do you want to be a garbage dump or a grocery store on any given day? And so, as a social worker, I can go to meetings with the leadership teams, well-being teams, culture teams, whatever the school's calling it, and we can just dump about students, or we can just, it just becomes like a fest of sharing all our frustrations and not expanding our ideas. Or people can approach me as a grocery store of, this is all the tools that I can use to connect to help you make sense of that behavior. And so my focus has been on understanding human behavior, what drives human behavior developmentally, incrementally, and also taking a lot of care to start to understand the patterns and the seasons that happen through different periods of time in schooling, so that I can create a common language. And I think, one of the myths I find about schools is, and let's be fair, this is an organizational myth, is this idea that we just need consistency. And if it was consistent, everything would go away, which is
Mhm.
a ludicrous idea because we're so many different humans and we're going to react in different ways. So my consistent and your consistent, we might be consistent to us, but it's going to look different. And so I
Mhm.
prefer predictability. What can we predict? What are the patterns? And so working in those teams, I think it's really important to sit down and kind of map out the pattern that we're seeing for the student or for the family or for the cohort, so that we can anticipate where are the needs going to be best met. So often, I think, with whether it's behavior or even well-being with staff, we're seeing this in, I think, education at the moment, with a lot of the staff self-care. And we're just shooting arrows in the dark. Like, if we bring donuts to your staff room, you'll be happy. Or if we let you wear jeans one day a week, you'll be happy. It's like those
Yeah.
things are
Well,
nothing to do with the problem.
because I was actually reading in your book this morning, so I was kind of going through chapters 5, 6, and 7 specifically.
Mhm.
But it was like the idea of kind of having I guess the opposite of a carrot at the end is like it acts as like a soothing mechanism. But like, why are we kind of building problems that need to be soothed? Like, that's not necessarily the foundation that we want. And donuts, I mean, I like a good donut every now and then, but I mean, conditions are much better than the neediness of the donut in the first place.
Well, exactly, and the donut does not change the hurt feelings. There's nobody who ever got, food at a staff meeting and went, "The school loves me." Like, wasn't the solution. It just was
Okay.
a short-term happiness.
Yeah.
And I think so often we treat adults in the same way we treat children. We just treat humans the same, and we don't learn new strategies and tools. The idea of joyful responsibility that I talk through in my book is how do we walk on an incremental journey of learning to be happy from within, joyful from within when responsibility comes our way. So increasingly managing levels of freedom. So when they're 5, we're giving them a certain amount of freedom. We're helping them learn how to manage that freedom well. But we tend to kind of almost stop when they hit teenagers, and then we treat our adults almost like they're teenagers, and we continue to give them, bribes with food or rewards. We continue to, reprimand them in the same way. And, we don't actually evolve to expect people can and will manage themselves well. And we don't teach our adults how to be self-sufficient. So they how to self-soothe, how to regulate, how to understand what's going on for themselves, how to unpack, their past belief systems and decide who they want to be. And these are really important traits that if we're not raising our kids through school to learn how to do this for themselves, who's going to show them as adults? Is your boss sitting down with you and showing you how to self-regulate? How are they going with self-regulating? And so these are important skills that we're missing from our workplaces and so I guess, a lot of people read Loving Our Students on Purpose, and particularly when we go and run the programs in the schools with the leadership team, usually by week 2, somebody says, "Oh, this has got nothing to do with the kids." Like, no, it's all about the adults.
Yeah. And that's an important, I guess, place to go. So I guess first what I want to potentially get the perspective on the other side of the world here for
Mhm,
I guess how you kind of go about being, I guess, like the social worker within that resource team, because I guess like my experience and like social workers kind of know the ins and outs of like who's on file, who's requested support, and what supports are available, how often they're getting support. And that's kind of, I guess, the tools in their toolbox of what they can provide is, I guess, trying to find them the right connection for someone to kind of discuss their issues with. But I guess from like a school leadership team, we often go like it's still pretty much, do they need further assessment? I guess, is there kind of the like break books are kind of the common one as well, kind of giving them that little, I guess, token to potentially get out of class or maybe give them some more agency over their day. But those kind of seem to be like break books and finding ways for students, I guess, to have a bit more agency over their own time are
mhm.
kind of the main two tools that we're using whenever sort of some kind of like behavior comes up. So I guess one, how would you respond to potentially adding on to that? And like, what are some common criticisms potentially of the
Mm.
way some teams handle those issues with their students in their schools?
Yeah, great question. I guess like my history as a social worker, I don't often refer to myself as social worker, and certainly I'm not a traditional school social worker because I came through the school system first with a human service criminal justice dual degree
Okay.
before I did my social work. So I already had my role, and I really was more integrated into that leadership space already and added
Okay.
the social work and the neuroscience on top of it. So my role in the school was to oversee all student behaviour and well-being. So I was on the exec team alongside the heads of school and learning enrichment and those staff that were leading the school. And our team, we had about 7 people. We oversaw behaviour. We used the responsible thinking model. Now, a lot of people have a problem with responsible thinking. Personally, whether it's responsible thinking or positive psychology or restorative justice or positive behaviour solutions, I don't really care what program the
Yeah.
school implements. To
Yeah.
me, what we're really looking at is the lens in which we apply the program. All those programs were designed to be implemented through a lens of connection and love rather than fear and control. But what happens is we put a program into somebody's hands, a school's hands, a team's hands, and if they have a lens of punishment in the way that they respond to the world, where you know, they identify victims and bad guys, where they look for blaming, where they go out of their way to teach through, pain as the teacher,
Hmm.
then it doesn't matter what program you give them, that's the lens they're going to apply it. So, we use responsible thinking, but many schools have used responsible thinking as a way to control. It's just another form of detention. It isn't used effectively.
Yeah.
Even all those tools that you've mentioned there, they're all great solutions. But in the hands of someone with a punishment paradigm, they're going to provide a card to track, how they're going in the classroom that day as a
Yeah.
way to catch them doing the wrong thing versus how do we celebrate all the great choices that you've made today? And we can look throughout the day, yeah, there was one or two things that needed some support, but the rest of the day was really good. How do we champion that good stuff? So largely is that lens. And so I think the most common complaint with many of the tools that we have available in schools is that they're creating this experience of chaos because I think teachers have this narrative that they've given their power away to the students and they don't have control anymore. And I
Hmm.
can't hold the student accountable, or I can't, I don't have any strategies because I don't want to use detention or I don't want to yell, but what do I do instead? And we haven't replaced it with the positive training for how do we set clear boundaries? How do we set clear expectations? How do we build relationship that has boundaries built into it? Because without that, you just have chaos. And certainly over here in Australia, I would say what we're observing in schools is the well-being trap, where we have swung so heavily into well-being and looking after students, and that staff are too afraid to hold students accountable. Like, what if, the student is suicidal? What if the student is upset and goes and tells their parents? What if they go to the media? There's so many what ifs around holding accountability that it's become a bit of a free for all. And so, of course, anyone looking on over enough time goes, well, that doesn't work. Now we need to swing towards, having high regulation. We need to go back to, I think they've got positive behavior solutions coming out. Well, the behavior curriculum, we need to teach them how to, and I go, well, you know what? I actually think it's both. In Loving Our Students on Purpose, we talk about how do we create this balance of high responsibility and high relationship. We need rules. We need clarity. Staff need to know that there is a line that when they get to that line, they can ask for help. And it doesn't mean that they're doing anything wrong. It means they need to get on with teaching and they need a team to come in and help them with that student so they can go back to teaching their core business. And that team doesn't look on at the teacher and think, oh, you're a terrible teacher. They think, now's my time to do my part to help the student. But my goal isn't for the student to love me as the only person they'll talk to in the school. My goal is to get that student back in your class connected to you. And so I think we've misunderstood this idea of trying to, it's my student, I need to help them, or I need to have all the answers, or I don't want help because I'll look bad. And we need to take this collective approach and start to see how can we integrate as a team because we all hold a piece of the puzzle. And that student isn't spending 1 year with one teacher. They're spending 13 years with over 100 academic staff. And as they go through that 13-year journey, we pass the student, that baton over and over again.
Yeah.
If we can predictably create a system that allows us to have both responsibility and relationship, we're going to create powerful humans who understand how to manage themselves because we incrementally teach them that. That's a long answer, but I hope that
No, that's
suffices.
fantastic. And because I guess like one of the main things that I'm seeing in what I can pay attention to is like we use kind of the PBIS
Mhm.
model, like positive behavior intervention, where we use it's like the rewarding positive behavior. We
Mhm.
do like 2 draws a week, and I guess everyone always kind of assumes that if something is going well, there's always something that you can do to improve it or make it better still. And I guess maybe you have to be wary of kind of the improvement trap in a sense. But I do think like some of the things that we've talked about at my school is that, okay, let's say for example, you're my student, Bernii. Things aren't going well. You're dysregulated. Things just it's just going out of it's getting chaotic, and I send you out of the room. One of the more common practices in our school is that like our principal will actually come cover our class while we go and talk to that student. So
Yeah,
that way
I
you
think
actually, well, that way you just have a conversation about why there's a
mhm.
disconnect, which I guess
Mhm.
kind of it all kind of comes back to that while the principal kind of oversees and takes that 5-10 minutes because I think maybe the missing part of even like thinking about myself being disciplined when I was a student is that like teachers kind of kick you out, then you go talk to the principal. Then it actually kind of gives a lot of the power to the principal to build that relationship and actually take that next step while the teacher's still kind of like maybe pissed
Mhm.
off is the wrong word, but they're kind of in their mode of like they're trying
Just
to teach while
regulated.
also yeah, like and even the idea that you can just send a kid out and then keep teaching, and then not like the entire class dynamic has completely shifted in that moment where you make
Mhm.
that decision. I think that's a few kind of underrated parts of that as well.
Absolutely. And I think, that regardless of whether the teacher is going out to regulate with the student, I mean, that works really well when the teacher is self-regulating and self-soothing, so they're
Yeah.
co-regulating with the student. If the
Yeah.
teacher's escalated and the student's escalated and they're both outside their window of tolerance, well, they probably need a
Yeah.
minimum of 20 minutes apart to come
Yeah.
back into a place where they can reconnect. And so, that might require the teacher to show maturity and keep teaching the class while that student co-regulates with somebody else. The key is if they are co-regulating with someone else. I like to think of it like inside out. They kind of go to maybe a person or a place that's designed to help them think through their thoughts. And then they can
Hmm.
come back ready to speak to the teacher effectively and with confidence. So I almost practice the narrative of how they're going to approach that conversation. As young people, they need a bit more support to do that. The
Hmm.
teachers, we hope, will have that maturity to go, I've regulated, I've gone on with teaching. Now that you're back, let's have this conversation. And so, whichever way it goes, the people who are doing the co regulating outside the classroom, the goal must be that they're handing the attachment to the teacher. They're not keeping it for themselves. And that's why I think that often it can deteriorate when we do have programs like that. That's external to the classroom, because if we're creating our own strong attachment, we want good relationship, but we actually don't want the student to want to stay with us. We want the
Hmm.
student to want to be with their teacher. So
Yeah.
it's difficult when ego gets in the way, or pride, or I think I know best, or if we partner with the chaos and the student tells us how bad the teacher is and we're like, yes, you're right. Like, we want people in those roles who are very good at managing themselves and making sure that they're just helping the student process their thoughts, going back and actually communicate effectively. So not partnering with that chaos, I think, is really important. One of the freeing models that I came across really helped free my mind of, is there a right or a wrong way to do this, is the idea of polarity. And much like breathing, so we all breathe in, we breathe out, and it's like an infinity symbol, that loop that goes around. So we breathe in, it's really good until our lungs are full and now it's bad. But then we have to breathe in again, it's really good. And so we breathe in, then we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out. There's a good part of breathing in, and there's a good part of breathing out. When we breathe
Hmm.
out, our lungs are empty, but of course, after a while, it's like we're desperate for air. It's really bad. And so, just like that infinity loop, responsibility and relationship actually flow back and forth. There's a really positive relationship, but too much strong relationship without responsibility becomes really bad. And then we
Hmm.
we swing and we pull up on this responsibility. We add our boundaries and our expectations, but too much boundaries and expectations become rigidity, perfectionism. We can get rebellion. So then we swing back towards high relationship, which is really good for a while until that
Yeah.
becomes really bad. And as leaders, we're almost at the crossroad going, oh, we just need to add a little responsibility, a little relationship, a little responsibility, and keeping that balanced perspective. It's, at no point do you wake up in the morning, Lucas, and say, I'm just going to breathe in today. No more breathing out. Like, we wouldn't do that. We have to
No
have,
more of that.
exactly. They're two interdependent poles. They require each other to exist, and
Hmm.
we can't separate them. But so many of our behavior programs, behavior management programs, is trying to pursue one over the other, rather than going, we need both. We need to teach students good quality practices and boundaries and
Hmm.
structure and strategy. And we need to have good quality relationships. It really doesn't matter what program we're going after. The goal needs to be, how do we reconnect after a disconnect?
Yeah, and I think too, we never, I guess, when we're trying to frame the problems that we still have and that are ongoing and probably have always existed in education, like you don't want to necessarily posit the question in a way that teachers potentially could be contributing to the problem, because we don't want to think that like we're already doing so much, we don't want to take blame, and that's not at all, I guess, where I'm going and trying to frame this question. Like, in what ways are teachers kind of getting in their own way of actually creating that connected classroom environment? I guess, like, what are the it seems to me that every time I go to like a PD or like kind of the collective teacher consciousness of like a new PD and a new idea, is that we always kind of retract back to our old habits and we kind of forget everything in the busyness. So I guess if someone's listening, they feel like, you know what, these last 2 months have just been brutal. Like, every day is chaotic. I guess, like, what is it that they can change? Because if anything, I would find it comforting in knowing that there is something that I can do to change potentially.
Absolutely. It takes thousands of repetitions when we're in a safe environment to make change. It only takes one in an unsafe environment for us to, rewire our brain towards survival. But when we're purposely going after change within ourselves without a traumatic experience, it takes lots and
Mhm.
lots of repetitions. I constantly say, put up an umbrella of grace and be patient with yourself between the moment when you hear about it to the moment you get it. And it's having that growth mindset perspective of, I want to recalibrate. So, what do I want to recalibrate to? What are my goals that I'm setting for myself this year? One of the best strategies, just day to day strategies that I use when I'm doing one on one coaching with my staff, and most of the teachers or clients I work with are teaching background or they're in schools, is what I call a Holtz plan. And it's basically hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed. Those are the 5 areas that when one of those things shows up in your life, you're more likely to go back to old patterns of behavior. So when you are making a shift and a change towards something new, and let's face it, for most staff, they're not the problem. They've been raised in certain ways with certain thought patterns, and we get to an age where we start questioning, do I still want that to be my normal or my experience, or do I want to rewrite my narrative? So that's what they're questioning. What do I believe to be true for me now? And so one of those areas, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed, is going to be out of balance, and it's going to trigger us to return back to old pathways, because the old pathways of survival just override quicker than conscious thought. And so what I get them to do is to write down just a little reflection. What do I notice about myself when I'm hungry? Do I notice there's particular times of the day? Do I notice I behave in a certain way? So what am I noticing? And then what do I need? So do I need to have some healthy snacks available? Or do I need to know what time I'm going to make sure I eat lunch, whether I'm hungry or not? Or whatever it is for you. Me personally, when I'm getting to a place where I don't necessarily notice I'm hungry, but I get lightheaded, and so then I've got to be paying attention. I need steak, I need iron. And so I
Yeah.
make sure we keep that in the freezer. So on those days, I can be like, tonight's a steak night. I need to have my iron. Then we need to think, sorry, my alarm just went off.
That's all right. That's all right.
What's going on when we're having this sense of hungry, angry, lonely? What do I notice about myself? What do I need to rebound to joy? What about lonely? That lonely is a confusing one. We often don't pay attention. This is a big one that shows up in our lives, especially when we're just living busy, 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 and we have no spare, time to actually sow into ourselves. And the way it shows up is tiredness. So as we are feeling lonely, we actually withdraw from people. And then we have that sense of we actually create our own loneliness. And so we've got to first look at the T for tired and figure out, is my sleep hygiene healthy? And if our sleep hygiene is healthy, we're going to bed at a reasonable time, getting enough hours, having good quality
Mhm.
sleep, and we're still tired. Potentially for lonely, we need to make some intentional plans to meet with friends, to go for a walk or go fishing or whatever it is that fills your cup, and actually have them scheduled in during the term. And the last one,
Mhm.
stressed again, like what do you know about yourself when you're stressed and what's your plan? And the question for all of that is, how do I rebound to joy? It's not that we will be perfect. There's no perfect adult. There's no perfect human. It's not that we won't get it wrong or that we won't lose our stack sometimes. It's that we know how to rebound to joy, and we know how to clean up the mess we made when we were dysregulated. Because we're
Mhm.
all going to get dysregulated. And I think unfortunately, it's a little bit of a myth that, teachers have to be perfect for their kids all the time. Kids don't need perfect teachers. They need teachers to role model what to do when they're stressed, what to do when they're hungry. I mean, we need to be able to show the students what is our plan to manage ourselves and to communicate this, because they need to learn this for themselves.
Yeah, and because I've always kind of jokingly said like period one with Mr. Clark teaching like his favorite subject with his favorite coffee is a very different Mr. Clark than the middle of the afternoon when it's like a more boring subject where the class is not engaged. Like those are two different people. Not that
Right?
I'm like super mean in the other one, but it's if I always my thing was I just need an afternoon coffee to sip on. Like I don't need like that was what and I like my friend shout out Devon Powell. He actually, 'cause I guess as teachers, and I know you talked about this in your book too, and it's probably one of my favorite subjects is imposter syndrome. And like, we're almost kind of always on edge to potentially be defensive because we have, I think a lot of us, no matter how long you've been in it, have like a seed of that, like always kind of potentially ready to sprout at any time.
Hmm.
But he said to me, he's like, you know what? Being regulated doesn't mean being perfect. Like
Yeah.
just because like and the point that I took from that was okay, when it's 1 p.m. I just had my lunch and I'm kind of sleepy and I just want my afternoon coffee, it doesn't mean that I'm not good, if that makes sense. Like it just means that I need a little bit more to get through the day to try and be somewhat of, because again, you're trying to be the same teacher for each class. And if your last class was horrible, you want to give the next one a chance. And then even for that would be different, I guess, depending on if you had the same classroom all day or not. But teaching high school and now middle school, like, it's pretty much a different class every period. But I guess how would you, like, for like teacher energy levels, like you talked about iron and like supplementation, and I don't mean to go down like a nutrition rabbit hole, but I guess what did you find has kind of worked for you, or how would you respond to that?
Honestly, I think you're hitting the nail on the head when you're essentially saying we're humans, and so are our students. We're trying
Yeah.
to create little people who can self-regulate at extreme adult levels so that we don't have to.
Yeah.
And I think that's the message that's kind of out there. Is like, if we can get these young people to be compliant, and I always think of that old computer game, the lemmings, and the little lemmings follow and fall off the cliff one by one. And then we don't have to regulate because they're doing it for us, because our sense of regulation is now coming from the students rather than from within. And I honestly think that, again, it's okay for us to be dysregulated at times, but we need to be able to recognize it and recalibrate and do what we need to get back to a place of joyful responsibility. And joyful responsibility is not necessarily like, oh my gosh, I love marking all these assignments and being, facetious. It's like, this is hard. And for the next 5 nights, I'm marking assignments till midnight. And I know that there's holidays coming and there's that offset. But right now I'm digging deep because I'm a mature adult and I love these students and I'm pouring into them. And so I think, again, it comes back to, what are we role modeling for the students? Because, so many of our students are growing up in this environment of, I need to be perfect because everyone around me is saying that I need to be perfect. And we're perfect for everyone around us. We're not even doing it intrinsically for ourselves. We're doing it because that's how they cope. Rather than, we all have rough days. I mean, we can have the best behaved student and something can really throw them off keel, like a parent divorce, and suddenly, they're dysregulated and we get thrown off, like, I can't believe they're behaving like this.
Yeah.
And I think you said it right at the start of asking more questions about, there's something going on behind this behavior. What is it? And where's our caring lens, a curiosity lens, as opposed to, oh my gosh, make the problem go away, panic, panic. And I think that that's really important, is that we're teaching students how to respond to the stimuli that's going on in their life, because as they become adults, like, this is not going away. Our kids are going to have
Yeah.
life thrown at them. This isn't going away. And so it's important that even in schools that we're teaching them how to respond to this well and effectively.
Yeah, because I've even noticed, like, one thing I'll joke about with a lot of my students now is that, like, I went through school, like I'm 27 now, but I'm like, I went through high school having Snapchat, Instagram, like all of these kind of, I guess, new age. I guess it's still all pretty much the same apps with like TikTok, and like they're all essentially the same thing as like potential other distractions. Because the number one thing that has blown my mind, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that in grade 8, I didn't stay up past 11 or 12 playing Call of Duty before I went to sleep. Of course I did, because I was a kid. But these kids are like openly flexing that they're like, oh, I only slept for 2 hours last night. And I'm like, well, there's no, and they're coming into school with like just these enormous bags under their eyes, and I'm like, why? And I think this kind of touches on the teacher part. It's like, why are you putting so much pressure on yourself to get a perfect result?
Yes.
Like, clearly, like they'll probably learn how to do like diameter and circumference one day if they really need to, but like, I guess, as like, what are the barriers in responding as a system to just cater to separate needs, as like why isn't an IPP like, we're going to work on this kid's sleep for the next 4 weeks? You know what I mean? Like, it's never anything that would be done at home. It's the only way it can be done at school. I guess, what do you think about like potentially expanding that idea of meeting needs at school differently than just academic ones? Because there's so much, like the sleep one is the number one, because sleep is like my number one priority. Again, we've got baby number 1 on the way, so I'm just like hoping and praying every day that it's at least still 6 hours and I can get away with it. But I know that's not going to be the reality forever. But
yeah. Look, I think I come across a very similar argument when I'm working with parents with divorced families, because the perspective is, well, we can't change what happens at the other house, so we just have to live with it here. And it's like, well, that's not actually the case. Kids are incredibly resilient to their environment. So you can educate them on how to behave in this environment, how what our expectations are here, and they can be one person in one place and a bit different in another place. And that's completely possible. And so I agree that schools are the perfect environment. Kids are there for thousands of hours every year. It's an amazing environment where we can teach them sleep hygiene. And you're right, like the impact on the brain is very similar to alcohol. And without hitting your post like late REM sleep later in the 6 to 8 hours, they're not getting memory consolidation. And so, when you're getting the 2 hours sleep a night, the impact it's having is driving up the anxiety levels, the vagal system's reacting with hyperactivity. And so there's all sorts of things that are being, impacted by lack of sleep. Environments like schools, it's not a long conversation to drip feed ideas about sleep hygiene and why it's good for you. Here in Australia, these kind of conversations do happen in our schools, which I'm
Hmm.
really grateful for. I know my son's school, they had a whole section of their health unit on sleep, and so that was fantastic because it drove conversations at home, because we'd been saying, minimum 8 to 10 hours at your age, and he says, "Oh, they said the same thing at school." We're like, "Excellent." We started to see the similarity, but I know that not all schools will do that. Some
Yeah.
parents will, and some schools will. Sometimes it's coming from one side, but at least they're hearing it somewhere. And the goal
Yes.
is, as they become adults, they're remembering, oh, I did hear this somewhere. I've come across this somewhere. How could this be helpful to me?
Yeah, because I think this is just that dynamic in every marriage. It's like I could have the cure for cancer, and my wife's still like, I gotta ask my sister about that. Like, not that she doesn't like trust my word or anything, but I think it's the idea of needing to hearing it from multiple places. Like, it's obvious that your parents going to tell you to sleep. Like, that's an obvious one. Then you hear from your teacher and then your friends as to why. You're like, "Oh, well, that actually makes sense. Like, what you're saying isn't actually, you actually are looking out for what's best for me." That's a crazy idea. I think
Yeah,
something
yeah.
I've noticed with the kids, but
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's sales psychology right there. You walk into a store, the first person approaches you, tells you about a product, you're like, oh, leave me alone. The second person comes up, he tells you the same thing, and you buy it from them. And you're like, why do we do this? They know this. Sales psychology knows this, so they don't get offended that you don't listen to them. They send in another person until you're at that place where you're ready. And so
interesting.
sometimes it is the parent, sometimes it's the teacher, sometimes it's the sports coach, sometimes it's a peer. But if
Mhm.
none of us are saying it, if nobody's drip feeding this to the students, they're educating themselves with themselves, and they surround themselves with themselves, so they turn out like big teenagers. And that's not what we want for adult society moving forward.
Yeah, and kind of to shift gears, not really, like a little bit. I remember because I read like the first bit of your book there, but like a few months ago when I received it there, and I noticed like your story about Rebecca and Taylor, and like I think
Yeah.
it's the very first chapter. And I know you said that you're not a teacher, but this was like a tutoring kind of time for you.
Hmm.
I can't remember how old you were at the time, but I guess if you were to kind of not to dilute the story by any means, but if you were to kind of break that into like 1 to 3 takeaways, especially for a way that like I can walk into my classroom tomorrow and be like, because my kind of main thing is like you kind of got to make it weird in a sense, like you got to say the cheesy thing that's not being said, but you want to say like you don't want to go up to a student and just be like, it's not working out, but I care about you. Like, what do we want to do? Like, no one wants to say the I care about you part because it makes them like feel weird almost. Like you almost shouldn't be saying that to anyone because for some reason I think we're still. I feel like we've moved beyond the stigma for mental health, but we're not necessarily beyond the stigma of like, no, like Bernii, I genuinely care about you. Like, what can we actually do? Like, this is not working. Like, I need to keep sending you out, but instead of just being mad and sending you off, but I guess to kind of bring that back, I
Hmm.
guess how can that story potentially apply to the way we can do things differently to connect with our students?
Yeah, some phrases that I found really helpful when we're in that position, we feel awkward about saying, I care about you, is simply to say, I've been looking forward to you turning up today. I love having you in my class. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. So phrases that allow them to see, like, when you get into my sphere of influence, I'm happy that you're here. So they can be a really helpful narrative to use. And Rebecca and Taylor, look, I was first year out of school. I was 19. I knew nothing at all, but I thought I knew everything. And how hard could tutoring two teenage girls be, right? Within 3 weeks, I had gotten my car and I went home and I was like, stuff it, you guys can teach yourselves. Now, these girls, if anyone listening, had been suspended for a significant amount of time, 10 weeks. I don't even
Yeah.
think it's legal anymore, but this
Yeah,
is
I
a
don't
long
even
time
yeah,
ago.
that's
And
crazy.
so, they were allowed back at school if they passed all their exams, and the school had given their parents permission to have me come and tutor them at an external facility. And they didn't even do subjects that I had done in school. Like, I was clueless, but I had watched my teachers and I knew how to be structure and rules and bribery and fear and yell and all. And really, it took about 3 weeks, but I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, this doesn't work. I gave up with frustration. And when Rebecca's mum, and all their names are made up, and changed all the details, but Rebecca's mum rang and she said, I really actually think you'll get through to them. Why don't you give it another shot?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I at that point, I'd rather sit on the couch and not have a job. Like, I was like, not
Yeah.
interested. But again, how hard could one more day be? So I went along and I had had enough time over that weekend, it was a Friday to the Monday, to think through, well, if everything I had done didn't work, what were things that I had observed my teachers doing that did work? And I had a long history in youth group and camps. I used to go to lots of camps. And so I took strategies from those environments, and particularly my youth leader at the time, who spent a lot of time just listening to me. And I went in and said to them something along the lines of, this isn't fun for me, and it doesn't look like it's fun for you. What would we need to actually do this? And question number one was, do you want to be here learning this stuff? And immediately they were like, absolutely, we really want to pass. We really want to go back to school. And it opened up a conversation where I hadn't even asked them what was going on. Like, how did they feel about the suspension? Because I was being all polite and not wanting to, poke the bear. And they just broke down in tears and shared the fear that they felt and the shame. And, they've been blocked from all their friends. They'd been labeled that kid. So parents had told their kids they couldn't hang with them. They didn't know if they could ever go back to school. Like, they were really scared. And that created a dialogue where I gave the control back, because it's fake control. I didn't actually control them, clearly,
Yeah.
because it wasn't
Yeah.
working. But I realized at that point I didn't control them, and I asked them what they needed from me. And they actually set their own timetable. They set their own break times. They set their own place for their phones to go. They decided when they wanted music and not wanting music, what order of the day was best to do subjects. Like, I know in a school environment, you can't give that much control, but often we can give little things where students can choose between, do you want to sit by the window or, at an island desk? Do you want to sit at the front or the back? Again, we use seating as a way to control, actually giving whatever the choice is. Do you want the blue chair or the red chair? Do you want to write with, the grey pencil or the blue pencil? Like, does it really matter? Sometimes just giving the students a control over the things that they can choose from is significant in helping them feel a sense of agency and participation in the environment. You could go, like, I hated sport. I just wasn't a sporty kid at school. But, my teachers who listened to me and gave me choices and freedom, I would play football. I would do all these crazy sporting things simply because the teacher gave me the freedom to do it within that space. Whereas another teacher who was rigid and controlling, I would just sit down and refuse. I could be super disrespectful when I was at school. And I guess, like, if you're a doctor, for example, you don't ever want your doctor that you go to forget what it's like to be a patient. And it's the same with teachers. You don't want teachers to forget what it's like to be a student, to remember their experiences and what was positive and negative, and build into your own practice the things that were positive that you actually had. So Rebecca and Taylor for me was where my curiosity got sparked. Like, if it was that simple, in the end, was that one conversation to open up a dialogue. And Rebecca, the main character from that story, she actually went on and became a school social worker herself down the track. It's
Hmm.
quite amazing. I get to, champion her and cheer her on. She's an adult with children and family and all that now. But it's opening that place for them to show up and be authentically them. And it required me to be authentically me and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing my
Yeah.
best, and I'm not coming in to be like, I'm a terrible person and I've got this imposter syndrome and I will never be able to teach you. I don't come in criticizing myself. I just came in and say, I don't know what you need. Can you tell me
Yeah.
what you need in the situation? And they were so excited to tell me because at that point, after all of the chaos they'd been through with their suspensions, no one had stopped to ask them, what did you need? What did you need when you got into that situation that got you suspended? What were you controlling for? Because we're all controlling for something.
And I just, as you're saying that, like, for me, I think like absolutely. But I guess why is it that tomorrow or whenever and this comes out and someone listens to it, like it almost seems that the narratives with the student centered learning and the student controls, like give an inch, they expect a mile kind of thing, I think is what has been my experience with other teachers talking about that. And I don't have a classroom this year, like, because I'm in that kind of resource academic support role. But I guess, like, what do you think the best ways to release some control where like you still kind of need to have the like I'm the leader of the group and I'm still the one who's responsible for guiding you, because I would argue that most teacher evaluation is still kind of built on those old traditional principles
Mm,
of I teach, you learn. But I guess,
mhm.
is there anything like niche that you kind of heard other teachers talk about in their own practice for, I guess, management, but from like management through subtraction versus addition?
I really think it's a powerful image to just think about control as like a remote control. If I had a remote control and I could control my class and make them learn, then just think about the buttons that you would choose on that remote. It would be like, do your work, take your hat off, put your phone away. We would all have a mute button, right? And away we would go controlling our students. We don't have control. It's an illusion that we can control our students. The minute you become a dad and you have that little baby, that thing is not pooping on command or sleeping when you tell it. You learn very quickly that you're not in control of another human. Any young person I've ever sat with, every single student, and I've sat with thousands, all say they want the same thing, and that is control. They want control and a say over their life. So, how do we create environments where they have choice, where they can live out this control that they have anyway? So, it's an illusion to think that I can make you stop talking. They're going to talk if they want to. Nothing can stop that. In my day, they used to put sticky tape over our mouths to make us stop talking. Like, still didn't work. Kids still talk.
Yes.
You cannot control another human being. On a good day, you can control yourself, but that's
Yeah.
it. And so I suggest that in our environments, and this could sound, if it's taken through a punishment lens, this can sound like, policy and rules, but actually, I think it's more from the behavior education space is when we educate our students on, I want you in my class. What it looks like is you sitting quietly doing your work, participating in discussions, recognizing like every teacher has like a tell. Maybe my tell is when if I stand in the middle of the room in that particular space, that's when I expect everyone to be quiet. I raise consciousness and awareness. I tell you what to expect from my environment. When you're not meeting those expectations, this is what I might choose to do. So I'm letting you know now you have a choice. You can be in this classroom participating freely, but if you're being disrespectful, then you might need to wait and speak to me outside the room or whatever your school procedure is. Again, I don't say, and I'm very hesitant to say, take away any sort of like punishment if you don't have something to replace it with, because that just
Mhm.
leaves teachers with nothing, right? But if the students are aware that this is how we do things, yeah, this is who we are in this classroom or who we are in this school, and we have language around it, then it's a clear choice. And now we have to be happy with whichever choice they make because they've got control and freedom over their own life. So if you're choosing to be disrespectful, then I need to follow my processes that the school has to follow up with that. I rather than taking that personally, going, I needed you to choose this. When we limit ourselves to the one choice, the one good choice, and say, don't learn about life in front of me, just behave this way, then we're not actually giving them freedom and control. We're trying to control them and then it fails, which it always will because we can't control them. And then we come back around to see it didn't work. And then we just loop back around, which is
Mhm.
the nature of the punishment paradigm. So I guess strategy wise is whatever you're doing, making sure that we explain it really clear to the students. Like, this is what I want for you. This is my goal for you. This is what our school procedure is that I'm going to follow if you make that choice. Is that what you want? And so That's why I love the responsible thinking process, simply because it gives a clear outline of questions. And if kids do that for 13
Mhm.
years, they know them off by heart. What are you
Yeah.
doing? What should you be doing? What happens if you keep doing that? Is that what you want? What you do now? It's like the set phrases. And, in prep, which for us is great for your 4 or 5 year olds, they will need to do that process thousands of times. And you
Yeah.
get into grade 10s, 11s, and 12s, the teacher might ask the questions, and the kids just, I know what I'm doing. I'll just
Yeah.
recalibrate back to what I want to be doing, which is getting my work done. And, they don't actually get to finish the process because they just calibrate naturally. But we don't often have a set of phrases, so every day we're coming up with a new strategy. And that's exhausting for teachers, coming up with
Yeah.
new strategy. Having some clever one-liners. So the one-liners that I talk about come from Love and Logic, and they're designed to not argue with the student. I know, probably so. I don't know. Nice try. That may be. So learning some of those phrases off by heart. So you might just tattoo them down your arm. Like, I just need to know these.
Yeah.
Because kids will argue. And so rather than get drawn into the argument, have a few phrases that help us segue to get on with the task of learning. So it's those practical strategies of they're all designed for me to manage me. They're not designed for me to manage you. So it's me staying calm, guiding you through a process so that you know what your choices are at the end of it, and you've made a free choice, and it's not a slight on my way that I teach or my relationship with you. It's a choice that you need to make in that moment. I'm here when you're ready, is the message that we're sending. Because I love having you in my class and I can't wait for you to come back, but it is going to be fun in this environment.
Yeah, and I just think too, like just a few weeks ago, because I've kind of joked that I'm like kind of the nomad of my school now because I'm in an academic support role. So I have different kids in different rooms all the time that
Cool.
I'm like working with in class or pulling out. There's one kid in a class that I've taught a few times, like just like needing to sub and cover here and then. And he just looks me dead in the eye. He's like, "I don't like you." And I just put my hand on his shoulder and I was like, "And that's okay. You don't have to
Yeah.
like me." And I just went on with my day. And I've noticed because I kind of wanted to test the theory. I've actively sought this kid out and just said hello to him and like asked him how he's doing. And I'd be like, I'm like, "It's so nice to see you today." Like I get jokingly almost because I know he said that to me. And now I notice he's actively seeking me out in the
Mm-hmm.
school. So I just think it's like I
Really
could have
good.
easily been like, "That's so disrespectful. Go to the principal's." I could have just bought into it and like went.
Mhm.
But in the moment, I don't know whose voice was in my ear, but I was like, I'm just gonna completely not engage with this. And I was like, it's all good, man.
Mhm.
And I went over and I kept talking to the teacher. I think it was very shocking. But I think, I guess, for me being in my own classroom, my number one problem has been discipline or what that means, what that looks like. And I think as I was kind of reading through your book this morning and like just like kind of reflecting a little bit, I remember there was this one time I was teaching grade 12 and teaching in northern Alberta. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Canada and I guess like the geographical stereotypes, probably not quite as much, but northern Alberta is like very much like an oil town, like like kind of like the more like the like hard nosed like blue collar kids. That's more so the norm. And I was teaching a class that was like there's like a college stream and like trades college stream and like a university stream for what I was teaching. And I remember like the class was just like no one was listening to me. And then all of a sudden I just full on yelled at a student that I had a great relationship with. But after the class was over, he came up and he shook my hand. He's like, "Mr. Clark, I've never actually respected you until now." I was like, why did I need to do that for that to happen? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I didn't like yell at him or scream at him. And like, I literally just, I remember I yelled his name and I was like, "You need to stop talking while I'm talking." And it was, that's about as serious as I can get. And I almost kind of want to laugh at myself, even getting to that, because that's just not how I feel that I am. But I guess,
Mhm.
how would you have responded to it? Like, why did that student say that? And maybe, I guess, what do the students need to unlearn, I guess, about what discipline looks like in a school setting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the students are necessarily looking for discipline. They're looking for the boundary.
Yeah.
Much like Jurassic Park, you get all those
Yeah.
dinosaurs and they stick them on an island and they put that electric fence around the island. And those dinosaurs are geniuses. Like, they keep going to check that that fence is on. And for
Yeah.
us, that's our love fence. That's our relationship fence. And those
Yeah.
kids are going to look for it because they're checking
Yeah.
that we're keeping our love on. They're checking that they're
Yeah.
safe. And when students don't have those boundaries, you often come into schools where they talk about cohorts, particularly having their own little like gang and they're ganging up against the teachers. Often it's because the boundaries aren't clear. And so they have to make those boundary rules for themselves, and they do it within their teenage groups or their children groups. And most students want to know, am I safe around you? And can you protect me? Because if you can't protect me, I need to protect myself. And
Hmm.
so we have students in classrooms self-protecting and self-preserving because they don't think the teacher has a boundary. They don't think the teacher is going to say stop or enough. And they watch students being disrespectful and behaving the way they do, and they don't see that boundary and that line. Now, does it mean that we yell and scream and demand silence? I'm not saying that at all. But I am
Hmm.
saying that when we're really clear about this is what this environment's going to look like, this is what I expect, and I'm going to hold to that, then you're more likely to see students just come into that space and they can relax. They can be like, oh, okay, I know what the expectations are in this space, I'm safe. Much like parenting, it's very similar. When you're parenting and you let things go over and over again and you don't hold accountability to the way your kids speak to you disrespectfully, and you're not clear on this is how we are in this family, after a while, like it's gone on for so long that we blow our stack. And then, but actually, if we'd responded to that whining or the disrespectful language really early on, it wouldn't have
Yeah.
escalated to that point. And so we often set up the environment and then we blame the student, but they're
Yeah.
just living out to the boundary that we've kept, or at least
Yeah.
our tolerance level that we've put up with. And often, like I talk in Australia, we've just had week 3. So school's just started back. We're 3 weeks into the year.
Hmm.
So Monday was week 4 starting, and week 3 is notorious for staff and teacher frustration to escalate. And what happens is when we unpack like polyvagal theories, you have this lovely window of tolerance. It's really wide. You've got lots of energy. You've come off the holidays. You're feeling like you're ready to go. And as
Hmm.
the pressure comes, that tolerance gets lower and lower
Hmm.
because we're tired. We're not self-caring. We're not using our HALTS plan. And also on top of all that, every single day, Johnny's come in the classroom calling out and being silly. And it's in our
Yeah.
tolerance, so we've ignored it, or we've just kind of brushed it off, or we've not held him accountable, and we're getting frustrated. And now that our tolerances are low, Johnny doing the exact same behavior at the exact same places outside our tolerance. And this is your fight flight zone. And so
Yeah.
we go into fight mode. And we tell Johnny that he's the problem. And Johnny's like, I don't understand. I've been doing the same thing every day for 3 years. Like,
Yeah.
now you're mad at me? Like, I thought you were
Yeah.
cool, like, with this.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then we get this disconnect happening because we changed. Our tolerance has
Yeah.
changed. And so paying attention to what's going on for me so that I can be consistent. When I'm in a good place, I can hold you accountable. And when I'm not doing well, my tolerance is low, I can also hold you accountable. The same, not with my own fight, flight, or freeze response. It's having
Yeah.
a balance.
Yeah, 'cause I do think again, every teacher that I asked for like the first few years of university and such was like what advice for someone in their first year or going into their first year? Dude, you can't care if the kids think you're cool. Like I think if anything, like because I guess one of the things I wrote down here to talk about is like the common cliche was don't show your smile until after Christmas because we're obviously September to June, so it's like
Yeah,
let 4 months go by before you see them
yeah.
smile. But like,
In Australia, it's
uh,
don't smile till Easter.
yeah, so it's but again,
Ridiculous.
everyone has that narrative, but I guess maybe there is like to give the devil its due. Like you don't want to be cold and like not welcoming to the students, but you also want to make sure like you know what, like if we all have routines, procedures, and I tell you what you can. I guess like what's the difference between a boundary and I guess telling a student simply what they can and cannot do? Like what is the difference between the boundary and like taking away their control in a sense? I guess that's kind of where I go for the next part of it.
When I think about boundaries, I have this image in my head. Most people think about boundaries like
Jurassic Park,
reaching out,
but
yeah, or you're reaching out and you're strangling the kid. Like, this is the boundaries. I'm putting it on you. I think of boundaries as like a hula hoop around me. Around me, on my boundaries, I get to protect what's important to me. So in my boundaries, I can protect my values, my respect, my relationships, my time, my energy, my resources. These are the things that are precious to me, my honor. And so I'm looking at how do I manage my boundaries for myself? And how do I then role model to you and teach you how to manage what's precious to you? So you want to be treated respectfully. You want to be honored. So it's about learning and educating. How do I manage my boundaries? Because again, I can't control another person. So I'm actually not putting a boundary on you. The boundary's on me. So I'm communicating to the class, this is what fun looks like to me. I might be a teacher who loves to
I
have a good
like that.
debate. And I actually love to get everyone like arguing about a topic and, let's get some class discussion going. And then that class goes to the next teacher, and that teacher feels overwhelmed by students arguing with them and doesn't understand, like they just have a different experience of that. And so each teacher, each adult, each person you meet with finds a way to communicate, this is what's important to me. If we were a bit more explicit and be able to communicate like this, in this environment, we're going to do this, but when you leave this environment, we're not going to continue arguing. This is special for our classroom because this is something I find fun. So it's finding a way to communicate what is important to me, what I'm protecting, what does honor look like? This doesn't feel like honor. And so often, just our interpretation of keywords is really important. Like, talk to, I think you're probably a Gen Z.
97. I think because my wife and I are she's like 6 months older than me, but she was born in
Would lie.
96 and I was born. I think we changed like
Yeah, yeah,
eras in that 6 months. So I
yeah.
think she's a millennial, but I'm like the Gen Z, I think. Yeah.
There you go. You're right on that cusp. And so, like,
Yeah.
words like safety for generations have different meanings entirely to other generations. And so, for Gen Z as a whole, and this is a bit of a stereotype, but in general, the word safety means when you're saying something that makes me feel uncomfortable, I feel unsafe. We're actually, like, for my generation, that's really helpful feedback. When you tell me something uncomfortable, I wonder what I need to adjust to help in that situation. It's not unsafe. So safety for me means that I have physical safety, but also I can manage feeling unsafe to adjust. And so it could just be key words that sometimes, like the word fun, people are like, well, what does fun mean? Well, we need to dictate and be very clear. This is what fun means to me: respectful, kind. We're using, lower voices. For some people, having somebody who talks really fast and very loud and without any tone can feel very overwhelming. So then they're like, you're not being fun. Well, that's not fair, because that's
Yeah.
helping us. We need to understand how they're engaging with us. So too often, I do think we misinterpret keywords, and we give PD and we give training, and everyone took away a totally different meaning from the discussion that was had. Then we throw out lines, well, if everyone was consistent, I'm like, consistent like who? Like which one? Which
Yeah.
interpretation? My advice to a first year teacher, if there's any first year teachers on here, is spend the first year, when you open your diary, look at your Saturday and Sunday, and that's not there for you to work on the weekend, number one. Saturday and Sunday is on Friday afternoon. In Saturday, just jot down a few notes. What did you notice about the students this week? What did you notice about the classroom environment or the school, like the overall? Did you notice there was maybe a spike in parents complaining or a spike in kids arguing with each other? Like, what was the pattern you noticed that week? Jot down like 3, 4 ideas. And in the Sunday, what did you notice about yourself? Did you notice that you were more irritable? Did you notice that you were having lots of fun and really creative? Did you notice that you lost your stack that week?
Yeah.
Usually, if you track your patterns, in Australia we have 10-week cycles, so it makes it really easy. We've got 4 10-week blocks. But you can get to the
I
place,
love
if you
that.
track that, you actually know which weekend every quarter you need to self-care. Because you know which week, predictably, you're going to blow your stack because you haven't set your boundaries. So you can see it. And when you can track your patterns, so like most teachers, they need week 3 to week 4, that weekend, lots and lots of self-care. And then generally 6 to 7 again, they might need a top up. In my role, week 7 is when I feel the most pressure. And so week 6 to 7, that weekend, I need to be really intentional. So now, instead of shooting arrows in the dark and just throwing out self-care and donuts, 4 weekends a year, I can actually plan good quality intervention that suits my personality. What do I need on those weekends? And my family can afford to let me plan whether I need to be like go away for a weekend, or whether I need to have a day at the beach, or whether I need a big family barbecue and that's what fills my cup. Whatever it is that fills your cup, we can start getting really intentional. So first year teachers, I say just get to know the patterns, and it's going to take a few years as you start to see regularly in week 7 every year. For some reason, week 7, kids and technology issues. Why? Well, because it's study week and because they're doing assignments and parents are not paying attention. They step back thinking that they're studying, and kids under stress and pressure and anxieties are going to do more silly things. And now they've got the computer in front of them doing more silly things. So why don't we send an email out to parents in week 6 saying, hey, just letting you know, week 7, we noticed that there's often a spike in technology issues. Please stay vigilant. We can start actually predicting the problem. This is not about consistency, it's about predictability.
Yeah, I think being proactive is definitely an underrated. It seems so like we're almost like wizards in backwards design. I don't know why the idea of being proactive is like it can't be applicable in other ways, because that's kind of one thing I really wanted to talk to you about, because it was something that came up as new to me was I think it was the right to right brain attunement or attachment. Sorry, I could be getting the words mixed up there, but I guess I've heard the same concept in like of mirror neurons. And so I guess because it almost seems to me like teachers as a collective, like if it's Friday of a 5-day week and everyone's exhausted, then I suddenly feel exhausted. You know what I mean? It's almost like we have this like collective. I don't mean to be too cheesy here in the collective energy world, but I do think there is something to that. And so I
The
don't want to
term
keep
you're
you
looking
here.
for is the parallel process.
Okay.
So we somatically start to feel what other people around us are feeling. We regulate.
Mhm.
And there was a study
Mhm.
done on heart math, and at the university level, they had lecturers coming into the back of the university, the big tiers, and the students were not allowed to look. And they just had somebody come in the back and they had to write down the energy or the emotion that entered the room. And so they had someone come in who was really angry and somebody who was like really in love and somebody who was like really scared. They had these different presents come into the back and they had to record what the energy was that they were feeling and somatically experiencing within themselves. And the accuracy was off this chart. And so this idea that we could parallel process or I could attune to your emotions, it happens, the students attune to us and we attune to them. It's the exact same skill set that you have when you're co-regulating or co-escalating. There's just a different
Mhm.
word for it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna pause this here. I can edit this part out. But how much time do you have? Like, do you got like 10, 15, like, I don't, we can cut now if you'd like, but I just don't want to take too much of your time. I just got a couple more questions, but we can always do another
Have
one another
about
time.
10 minutes, and then I'll
Okay.
have
All
a
right.
program to run.
Cool. Yeah. Sounds good. So I'll just ask you two more questions. Sorry. I'll edit this part out. I guess one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was like toward the end of your book, you kind of bring into, and this is honestly one of the more ones that I more so skimmed at the end of today when I was kind of preparing, but it's the idea of like the love language, like the acts of service and affirmations. I guess to me, I kind of initially took that as like a way to provide feedback. But I guess why did you decide to include that in the work? And I guess like what is the utility of knowing it?
Yeah, so I guess like when we're talking about loving our students on purpose, there's two elements. There's loving the students, genuinely liking them, wanting to be around them, and on purpose. There's this intentionality. So we've got a plan that we're going to put in place so that I can consistently show up and care for you on your good days and your bad days. And so love languages, which are the love languages by Gary Chapman, they're a great way for us to build connection. And so, in the book, we talk about connection like a tissue and it can be really thin and fragile. Or if we build up lots of strong relational connections, it becomes more like a rope. And when you've got this like nice strong rope, you can tug on it and someone's coming with you. And I'll often
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate this when I'm speaking to school staff, and I'll go up to someone and get them to hold the tissue, and I'm like, don't let go. And then I ask them to come and co-present with me, and I pull the tissue and it rips. But I don't have any relational pull in that connection. And then I give them a rope, and I'm like, under no circumstances let go, just hold on. And then I pull on that rope, and they might not move out of their chair, but the whole chair moves towards the stage. And, eventually they get up and join me, and everyone, claps for them.
Yeah.
The idea that relationship takes those little credible moments constantly. The love languages is one of those really useful tools where we can communicate care and cherishing and that you're valuable by paying attention to what fills a student's cup. It's a little bit like, I like to think of them as languages, as in like, Spanish and Zulu and French and, we've got these 5 different languages. Rather than getting all the kids to speak our language, I'm acts of service that you guys all need to clean up every afternoon. I'm going to be the mature one and learn to speak 5 different languages in the classroom. So I'm going to be communicating with words of affirmation and quality time and acts of service and gifts. And what's the 5th one? Falling out of my brain. But the five. So, and it's often we think, oh, but how do we do that? Like it can be really simple things. Touch. And touch is the one that gets misunderstood in schools. Yes, we all know you can do your high five and your fist bumps and your elbow taps, and they're all the rage at the moment. But touch is about my sphere of influence. You can allow your students to sit in your chair. That helps them to feel in your space and bubble. Bending down beside them at their desk and pointing and looking in the same direction at something is a same element and feeling of touch. I had a student who behaviorally would escalate constantly, and we realized they were 4 or 5 years old at the time. They were coming to our environment because they felt safe and nurtured there. And so what we did is we bought them this little blanket and we called it his hug. And anytime he wants to see us, he could put his hug on in the classroom. And he stopped visiting us. We had to go to his classroom to see him thriving because he would just wrap himself in his hug and get on with his day. I mean, gifts. Gifts is not like that we have to buy our kids all these crappy presents that we're, giving out as prizes, or we have to give them a pizza party. It's knowing that for a few kids in your class, if you thought about them when they weren't around, it is going to make their day. So bringing them a seashell because you went to the beach and they had told you about a holiday to the beach is going to just, they're going to be eating out of your hand for a whole year. So it's about small intentional acts. And often people say, oh, but how do you know every single kid's love language? I say, you don't. But you can use all of them. You can build 5 opportunities in the year to do something for the students. Like, today, I'll put all your chairs up. Guys, don't worry about it. You guys head off early. And boom, all the kids with access service, like, oh my gosh, tank filled. The next day, everyone gets a note on their desk. Well, and it can be something that's printed. It doesn't have to be handwritten. It can be really simple, but it builds those fibers in the rope that I'm thinking about you, I'm cherishing you, which is I'm thinking about you when you're not around, and I want you in this room. So I'm going to demonstrate this, not just in academics, but in what I do to strengthen the relational cord between us.
Beautiful. All right. And so I have my one major quote that I always end the podcast off with. And it is, education is what remains once one forgets everything that they learned in school. So I guess for you, Bernii Godwin, when you're speaking, giving workshops, giving presentations, what is it that you want people to take away from their time with you specifically that they won't get anywhere else?
Great question. I want people to take away the idea that there's not a right and a wrong way, but that we can all recalibrate and rebound to joy by paying attention to what's going on for us. And how do we balance both relationship and responsibility collectively at the same time in how we first manage ourselves and then how we bring other people into our sphere of influence. So I honestly think that teachers are doing this already. What my hope is just to name what teachers are doing and that they'd be hearing even on this podcast and turning to their peer and going, this person's just saying what I've been saying all along. But we're giving a collective voice to this is already what teachers are doing. This is already what most of us believe to be true. But collectively having a voice into it means that we can take it beyond just what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and we can impact school environments or communities and nations.
Beautiful. All right. Bernii Godwin, loving our students on purpose. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Lucas.